Hello, and welcome to another episode of Undiscovered Beasts and Strange Phenomena. Please join our experienced and knowledgeable panel of hosts as we explore the great mysteries of our time: Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, and unexplained phenomena.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Undiscovered Beast and Strange Phenomena with Adam Davis. My name is Mike Richburg. I'll be hosting this evening, while I have the fine distinction and great pleasure of talking to our host, Adam, about his great new book that's just come out, Extreme Expeditions 3, Bigfoot versus the Yeti. Adam, welcome.
Welcome. It feels weird you interviewing me, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, I might even get the hang of it one day. I'm very much looking forward to it myself.
I'm sure you'll do a great
Adam,
job.
I know you quite well, and it's definitely it is my pleasure to be in this position this evening. But for those of us that might not know too much about your background, before we get into the book itself, could you tell me a little bit about the basics? For starters, you were born in the UK, is that correct?
Yeah, I was born in the UK, and at the moment I live in San Diego.
Yes, and you currently reside in sunny Southern California, where the weather's always almost quite pleasant. I understand that. I was going to ask you, coming up, as in the case, in so many cases, like in the case of myself and others I know that have interest in the field, did you have an interest in like unexplained phenomena and that type of thing as a young man?
Yeah, I was always, there were two really formative experiences that got me interested in doing expeditions in the first place. The first one was really, when I was very small, I had a sister that died of cancer. And it was very horrible, both for me and for my parents. But that made me realize at a very young age that it was important to grasp opportunities in life. I mean, you talked yourself to me when you had your heart attack about how you understood the value of life and making the most of it. And I did too. But from a very young age, it had a massive impact on me. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm not going to waste any of my life. None of it's promised. I'll be grateful for what I've got, and I'll make the most of it. And I really did have that attitude. But I always had a love of nature and a love of tracking. When I was a small boy, I was always out tracking animals, always in nature. I was in love woods. It's where I feel most comfortable. It's my happy place. Urban environments I work in because I have to, but I always really want to be outdoors and in nature. So I had a combination and interest in all of those things. And then when I started to get interested in more exotic adventures, because I realized that to do exploration, I'd already got a lot of the necessary skills. I had to practice them and refine them, but also you needed guts to do the sort of hardcore thing ultimately I wanted to do, like go to places like the Congo, and I had that. I wasn't foolhardy, but nor was I scared either. So I thought, I'm just going to go off and do this, and I've spent decades now pursuing my hobbies and ambitions, and I don't regret it. Some of the experiences I regret, some of the mistakes I've made I've regret, but all in all, I'm really glad that I've done the things I've done, and I've not ebbed away my life.
Well, that's very fascinating testimony in itself, and I would wholeheartedly concur that we must really truly try to take advantage of the time we do have here to live life to its fullest, for sure. And that's very interesting, Adam. And I'm curious, what was the actual point? I mean, like, what got you actually started in Bigfoot research, per se?
Bigfoot, well, I'd never gone for it, really. In North America. I'd done stuff all over the world. Originally I wanted to go to the Congo, and I went to other exotic places. I was one of the first people to cross to the Kula Swamp in the Congo, and then I went to Mongolia, and I climbed mountains in different parts of the world. But I'd always been a bit put off by the Bigfoot phenomenon because there seemed to be a lot of people doing it, so I wasn't sure necessarily what value I could add. And also, it was a very confusing field. It wasn't like, who would I approach? And I always thought, I'll do it one day, and one day never came. And then I was in China. I wanted to do a story about the Yeren in China. And I did it originally for Monster Quest because I'd done a film for them in Sumatra on the orang pendek, the bipedal primate orang pendek, and they really liked it. And they said, well, we want you to do another one. You can either choose the Congo or not the Congo. I think they went somewhere else, not quite the Congo, because it's a bit dangerous to the film. I think they went Cameroon or somewhere. And then, or Nepal. And I said, well, I'll do Nepal. I've not been there. So I did that with them, and that was good. And then I pitched them the idea of doing the Yeren, because I was always fascinated by the idea of the stories of the Chinese wild man. The stories went back thousands of years, and long before Bigfoots or stories about them had permeated into popular culture. There were paintings of these wild men that lived in a set part of central China, and they paired me up with Jeff Meldrum, Dr. Jeff Meldrum, and he said, we were doing some filming in Beijing before we went off, and I said, well, Jeff, tell me about this Bigfoot stuff and this Patterson Gimlin. I mean, later on, I was to become friends with Bob Gimlin, and I like him very much, but at the time I didn't know him. And I said, tell me about it. What do you think? And he went through it frame by frame and explained to me why he thought it was interesting. And after that, I thought, well, I'll give it a go. I'll start looking into the Bigfoot phenomenon. Bipedal cryptids, of all of them, with the exception of the Makila, have always been my main interest in that field. Both exploration and that particular genre. So I decided I'd look into it, and I found myself living here in North America, and I started to explore the phenomenon and started to look into it. And I've been all over the place, everywhere from the desert regions where I am and some of the remote places, all the way up to Alaska over the last 5 years. And this is my third book. My first book deals with my adventures in the early years of my expeditions, and the second one in between, and this one talks about right up to the present day. But I think it's fair for you to ask about Bigfoot, because most of this book is called Bigfoot versus the Yeti because most of it's about traveling to different parts of North America with some unique privileges. I mean, some firsts within it. It's not simply I sat in a wood and this is what happened. There's some remarkable stuff in there, I hope. So that's really where we are, and it takes me right up to the present day and ends in Florida.
Right. And during the course of that, I'm sure some of your focus is probably, at one point in time at least, been around the area in the Pacific Northwest in regards to a major operation out there we're both somewhat familiar with, and that is the Olympic Project. I've always wanted to ask you, Adam, what is your view on the Olympic Project?
I like them. When I went out with the Olympics, I thought they were nice people. And I also thought that they were trying very hard to find evidence. There's always, with all of these groups that you sometimes think, people say, well, this methodology would be better than the other. But I think that they were sincere. I think they were methodical. I think they were documenting things, and they were trying to get good research. I think them and the Bluff Creek guys do a thorough job in different ways and different approaches. And I think with them, they have a possibility of success. It's very difficult. When I was there, I did try some grunting, and that was reciprocated, and a number of people heard that, and that was basically very similar to what a gorilla had heard. We were out on the trails, and I made these noises, and I got reciprocation back in a number of different areas. It doesn't prove Bigfoot exists, but it's an interesting anecdote. And a number of people heard them, and then Shane Corson put out a voice recorder, and we got what sounded like gorilla-like noises on the recorder, almost on a loop, which was fascinating. So we got some corroborative evidence, and I think that that's a great area that they operate in. It doesn't, as I say, it doesn't prove Bigfoot exists, but it's circumstantial evidence, which is interesting. So
it's
found
certainly
that quite
very fascinating.
Yeah, it was fascinating.
I think it's particularly compelling. The reciprocation of the grunt is something that I find very interesting.
Yeah, and it came from a couple of directions as well. And, lots of people heard that. Not just the party we were with, there were other people there. And it wasn't just the case of my buddies. There were people there who I'd never met before. And I was trying to adopt. I was trying to experiment, really, trying to see what worked and trying to adopt some sort of alpha male behaviour. And it seemed to pay off, and it was great. And we had a good time. And then there was that recording. So I did enjoy my time with them. I tried to get some hair samples from the vicinity, which I sent off to Todd Digital, but we didn't get anything off those. But it was all worth a go,
Certainly worth a try, yes, by all means, and that's certainly what it's all about. They certainly have a reputation as being in the forefront of field research, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, which, of course, is a historic hotbed for activity. And that's fascinating, though. The grunt reciprocation is something that I find is very interactive type evidential things like that are very interesting to me. Now, perhaps...
Yeah, I mean, one thing it seemed to do was when I made particularly sharp pertinent calls, which I'm familiar with doing with gorillas, it seemed to get quite aggravated, or at least one of them did. I mean, it's all supposition. I can't prove it to you. But if I was theorising, that's what I do. And, of course, I've used some of that tracking and behaviour. Again, I used it most recently in Alaska. And of all the things that I've done when I'm trying to elicit a response, that seems to be the one that is most successful. It's not determinative, but it seems to get some results. So, if it gets some results, I will carry on doing it.
Well, that's certainly understandable, and keep me informed on that. I think that's very intriguing.
Yeah, well, I'll do it next time around here, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, let's do that sometime in the field. That's very interesting. Perhaps on the other end of the spectrum a little bit, while we're talking about different things here, and I'm gonna go ahead and ask you this. Something else I've always wanted to ask you about, quite bluntly. What is your view on Matthew Johnson?
I'm not a fan of Matthew Johnson. I don't think. What I'm concerned about is, let me say this. Look, people can believe whatever they want. If they want to believe that Bigfoot is an astral being from another that has wisdom beyond all our knowledge, then that's up to them, yeah? And I don't hate them for it. I don't agree with them, but I don't hate them for it. But one of the things that he's done recently that I'm not a big fan of, I have to say, is he's been bringing people to his new area. Is it Soya or Soa 2 or whatever it is? And he's been suggesting that they can be magically healed by his friends who appear as orbs and stuff like that. Now, I have a problem with that on a personal level. And I admit that some of it is my own personal level, and I think it's important that I answer the question for your objective dissemination. So going back to my sister, when she was very young, there was a healer. I'm not going to name him, but my desperate parents were like, well, we'll try anything. And this guy didn't do anything for her. And I remember watching it, just thinking, as he waved his hands over her, what a load of BS, even when I was a kid. Now, the problem that you've got now is that very sick people, and I dealt with cancer patients, my mother was only given a year to live, and I spent a year looking after her, is that very desperate people in those circumstances will sometimes turn to desperate measures because they're sick and they need our help and support. And there's been a few instances where he's told people that if they, to the best of my knowledge, that if they camp outside at night and spend a night there, they could well be magically healed. And I just think that that's not a good way to go. I just think that could potentially be very harmful to those individuals. So I am concerned about that. You can believe what he wants, but I think bringing those people out and doing that could potentially be harmful, and I think that that's concerning. And it goes beyond the point where you say, okay, well, this might be a bit of fun, or God bless him and wish him well. I don't like that, Mike, and I'm very open about not liking it. People might say, oh, well, he's not doing any harm. Well, is he not doing any harm in that circumstance? That's for you to decide, Mike. But, that's the thing that I have a problem with, above all else. I don't think he treated John and I very well over the whole sower incident. But that's a whole different ballgame as to encouraging sick people to believe that they'll be magically healed by his Bigfoot. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's very sad in a very unfortunate way. That type of behavior is, it's one thing, I guess, to take advantage, quote unquote, of someone or something like that, but that's particularly unsavory to me.
Yeah, I'm not going to suggest that he's taking advantage of them. I don't know that. And that's none of my business. I hope he isn't, but I can't give a conclusion on that because I don't know any facts. But what I do know is that he's taking people out there, some of them who are sick, saying that they might be healed by his magical Bigfoot things, and I think that could be dangerous for those people's health, and I think that that's a reasonable assertion to make, and I think that should be scrutinised. Let's just put it like that.
Yes, that's fascinating, actually, that we both do indeed share the same view on that. And quite frankly, I think a lot of people do. I hate to say too much, but I would have to definitely say I'm definitely in your camp on that whole situation there. And perhaps we'll get into that more in a future show at a better time when we can talk about your experiences in the field there or something.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think it's worth saying is one of the things I don't understand is how people can sometimes create heroes which are worshipped almost like little gods from nothing, really. It's an interesting thing in psychology. I want people to enjoy what I do. I hope they enjoy it. I'm not disturbed if they don't like it. But I would never consider myself to be some sort of enlightened being who has more knowledge than other people. I never put myself on a pedestal. I don't want other people to put themselves on a pedestal. I'm a person who has done their very best with the abilities they have, and you have to be careful with these things because with someone like that, is that something where people are manipulating, or is it some sort of injury? He's had a brain injury. Well, what is it? I don't know, but I just don't want I think the healing thing can be dangerous, and that's
we're definitely crossing into some dangerous territory at that point. And I'm not accusing any particular person, including that person, of any wrongdoing, of taking advantage of anything. But I think a lot of folks would have to agree there. In some cases, tends to be a cult-like mentality involved in some of these examples.
Yeah, I think so. But that'll be for people to analyse. I'm just going to make that point and leave it there. I think on that. What I can say is, and I don't want to give away the conclusion in the book. But certainly very unusual things did happen at that Sower site. There's no doubt about them. But I don't think that they were connected with Matthew Johnson. And I think that that's important to state.
Well, that's fair enough. That's a fair enough assessment.
And the things that were there were not pleasant. They were malevolent. They weren't benign. They were unpleasant. And it was very disturbing. Now, people have speculated, oh, well, there was nothing there, it's a hallucination, or, it's just somebody was conning you. I don't think I was being conned. I don't think there were hallucinations. I think there were real things there, and that profoundly affected me. And I think profoundly affected John at the time. And we were thinking about it. It was very traumatic, what happened, and you can read about that in the book. And it was very disturbing, and also it changed my understanding of what may have happened in my world understanding, I think. It made me think about it, and I think about those things every day. But they were not benign. They were not wonderful things. They were not guardians of the portal or whatever. That's all nonsense. They were unpleasant, and they were determined. Yeah.
Well, that definitely makes me want to pick my copy of the book up again. It's hard to put down, I'll give you that. And changing gears a little bit here, you mentioned, these benevolent things and all. I know that comes up sometimes with Native American lore, and I know also you've worked with, to some extent at least, with Native Americans. Can you tell me about that a little bit, Adam?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I think that's very, very interesting. One of the tribes I've worked with quite a few Native Americans, because I wanted to understand their culture and views about these things. I didn't just want to work, and I mean this very respectfully, with researchers from one particular dimension. I wanted to look at lots of different things. And I've worked with Native American tribes in Canada, in California, in a few different places. I mean, some of them don't want me to give away their details, so I'm going to be a bit ambiguous about this. But it's not because I'm trying to be secretive. It's at their particular request. And I've had special permission to go in some of these areas. One of the places I was the first non-Native American to go into. Actually, in two of the places I was the first non-Native American to go into. And it took a lot of negotiation to get me there. And some of the legends there go back many thousands of years. And I was fascinated. I mean, there was one particular incident when I was in a cabin area where they had accounts of these things, and basically branches were being thrown at the hut all night, intermittently. And I saw potential nest areas, which I took photographs, and one of them appeared in the book. And I did that a few years ago. One of the things that I found interesting is that since as you mentioned, the Olympic project, it seems like everybody's trying to find potential nests, and of course most of them are nonsense, but some of them might not be. But they were very familiar with what they considered to be structures that the Bigfoot built. And I mean, these were beautiful, pristine areas. People did not go in them. And they were guarded before you even went into these areas. And it took, one of them, it took about, I think it was an hour and a half, 2 hours, just on a dirt track to even get to an area. There's a bobcat just stared at me in the middle of the road. I've been very privileged to go some remarkable places. And I've had a good time with the Native Americans. You've got to win their trust and respect. And in some ways, it's almost like tribes when you go to, in Africa, I contrast them with tribes, and compare them rather with tribes in Africa. What you don't do is go barging in saying, "Where's the Bigfoot?" Do you know what I mean?
That's the last thing you do, right?
Yeah, it's disrespectful. You spend time getting to know them as individuals. You promise, that you'll behave in a certain way and manner, and they sense that you can respect that. And I've made several visits to a few places, and I've gotten very well with them, and I'm a great proponent of them working to preserve their culture and traditions, and I'm happy to help them if they need me to do that. I don't want those cultures to be eradicated. And I've seen how they can be eroded gradually in a number of different ways. But I've had a lot of help from different Native American communities, and I'm very grateful for that. I've learned a lot from them and about their culture, and also about how they track and behave in the forests. And I like doing that. I've done that with some of the. I mean, I've done survival courses with members of the special forces, but the people I've learned most of, and I mean this very respectfully, like the SAS in Britain, they'll teach you how to survive in the forest, and they're very good at it, and I learned a lot doing that. But a whole different level was learning off the Pygmies how to be a part of the forest. And I think some of these people are very good at being part of the forest, and that's like super advanced. Not very many. Most people are not. Don't think because he's Native American he's going to have loads of wisdom. It's like our community. Some people are good at that, and some people are not. But the ones that are very good, and I found that a wonderful experience. And they have some amazingly fascinating knowledge. I mean, one of the guys talked about how he gave me a real description of how he'd seen one of these creatures, how it had behaved, and how it had run away, and he did its call, and how it had hid his face from it, almost like it was ashamed, it didn't want him to see it. And I thought that was wonderful, a wonderful and graphic experience of how he did that. So, that was one of the places I found where I had a bit of an altercation with a bear. So there was lots of adventure in that particular area. But yeah, I've spent some good quality time with Native American people, and they've always been very helpful to me, and I've dealt with a number of tribes, and hopefully I'll continue to do that in the future.
Well, yeah, and they do seem to really be all about tradition and respect, and it's good that you have the courtesy to respect that.
Yeah, you've got to take the time, and that's never been a problem for me because I'm interested in their cultures. So, one of the things I'll talk to them about first is their cultures, because I'm always interested in that. You just don't barge in. It's not the right way. You've got to take your time.
And they certainly do know their way around the woods, so to speak.
Oh yeah, very much so. Yeah, some of them anyway. Not everyone. I mean,
not all of them. Well, speaking about the woods, you've done quite a bit of research now, I guess, in areas in the southern United States, like the Carolinas and Alabama. Can we talk about that a bit?
Of course, yeah. The Carolinas is with you, and one of the reasons I went there was obviously we're really good friends, but also I was very interested in your own personal accounts of what you had seen. So it was particularly fascinating for me to go into that area, and also that whole southern area. There was the Carolinas, there's Alabama, and there was Florida, and I've been there several times. And I'm always interested in those areas because, of course, you've got that contrasts very nicely with some of the desert areas where I've done a lot of exploring around here, the mountains of the Pacific Northwest, as you mentioned, and obviously Nepal, and then Canada, and right all the way up to the cold of Alaska. So I wanted to go to different areas with different climates, different traditions, different legends from all over the American continent. And the South gave me a good opportunity. Now I was very interested in the swamp regions there, particularly. Very interested in the Cougars. I thought that was a lot of fun. Yeah, providing you avoid those cypress knee things, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, quite a bit of cypress knees in that area.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just thought it was a remarkable area, and I think there's a lot of potential for more research there. I think those swamps are vast. It's really an area worth exploring further. One of the things I noticed, very recently with those swamps is that interconnectivity across all of the South. I remember traveling, through Louisiana, and those swamps are vast, absolutely vast, and it's fairly easy to traverse a lot of those areas. And one of the things I've been encouraged with recently is that there's been a number of recent sightings in Florida. We're doing a show soon with David Sidoti, and he'll probably talk more about that. There's been some very recent sightings in those areas, and people don't realize, one of the things I was struck by is, you can go to Florida, to Orlando, say, and it's within 45 minutes you can be in an area that is, very remote, and very few people go there. So I think it's well worth an investigation. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's fascinating that you choose Florida as well. And it's a unique habitat in several ways, and you have chosen to do quite a bit of research in Florida as well.
Yeah, all of those areas. I mean, the people have been very good to me. Again, I mean, I found that you can look at the difference and between Southern hospitality and Native American hospitality, and people were extremely friendly there. In the South, in Alabama, I stayed at Mary Catherine's, and I tried some of your famous Southern hospitality and the food and all that lot, and it was great. had like gargantuan plates of food every day. She's completely spoiled me, which was lovely of her, and that's the way I think Southern people are. Yeah.
Yeah, they pour it on heavy down here with the hospitality and the groceries, man.
Yeah. So it's good.
Let me ask you this, Adam. What about Port Chatham, Alaska? What happened in Port Chatham, and why did you go there?
Well, when I was in Vancouver Island, I was doing an investigation up there, and I met one of the people who was on the investigation was Stephen Major, and he was very interested in the whole story about this hairy man at Port Chatham. Now, let me say, I'm very careful about what I do. I have to have a real interest in the story. It has to be inspiring me, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but if Bobby says from Oklahoma says, I've got a Bigfoot in my garden, I'm not really likely to go. Do you know what I mean? It's my time and money, I'm not likely to go. But I love this story in Port Chatham. It sounded very interesting. And the idea of it was that there was a hairy man type creature that basically the town was thriving in the 1950s. In synopsis, this is the story. So it's thriving in the 1950s, doing really well. And, something called the hairy man started to kill people. The town was surrounded by security, and, they still left. And I love the idea behind that story. It sounded like something out of a Stephen King novel, and it sounded just the sort of crazy adventure I wanted to go on, particularly as no one wanted to go. He sort of said, will you come with me? Will you help me out? And all of this. And I said, yeah, I'll do it. So the first time we went, we couldn't even get anyone to take us by the boat. No one would take us. We managed to find one person. It's interesting now because you're seeing the second time I went when we did the film with the Travel Channel, I saw a few more boats in the sort of surrounding area. So it's almost like we broke the seal on that one the first time we went. But the first time we went, when we come back, people were literally shaking our hands at the harbour saying, oh, you're alive. You made it. So the locals did not want to go there. It was regarded as a bad place, an evil place, and all of that lot. So, but I love the idea of it. It's just crazy ass going into a place where a monster's killed people many years ago. No one will go. It should have been a movie, but it never was. And we've been the first people to spend any length of time there. So there was myself and Stephen and Josiah the first time. They went a second time, and I did not go on that. I couldn't because I wasn't allowed to get the time off work. The third time I went, and we went with the Travel Channel. And one of the times, one of the things I was pleased about was I love tracking, as you know. It's always been my thing, and I like to try and get myself into a situation where I'm thinking how the animal might behave. And one of the things that I did like was that I was able to get something, an image of a creature, which moved very, very quickly on the film. And in the Travel Channel show, which is out, Dr. Robert Alley analysed that. I didn't know he was going to analyse it. So it's nothing to do with me. I was watching the film from scratch. I mean, I think, Stephen Beams and I and Josiah, all the people who were on the Travel Channel show, we didn't even know when it was coming out. They kind of moved it around on schedule, and then all of a sudden it was on, and I was like, oh, right, I was watching something else, and then suddenly it appeared, and I watched the first time I looked at it. I think I caught the last 10 minutes, I think. But he looks at it and he said, Robert Alley, he said, well, that isn't, obviously it's not definitive, it's not Patterson Gimlin or anything. But you can see what looks like a bipedal creature in the locomotion. And he said, well, that looks to me like it could well be a possible Bigfoot, which was interesting. I was pleased about that. And that was on the Travel Channel show. And look, the whole story is remarkable. I mean, there aren't there isn't much evidence of the buildings left in that area. It's really a few things, and some of them have suffered earthquake damage. But what you can see is evidence of the town. There was a lot of machinery parts still around, and there's piping. There was hot and cold running water. It wasn't a few shacks in a barn. It was a proper town, and the story is genuine. Something caused those hardened Alaskans to leave. Something so terrified them that they abandoned the town. And that is a genuine story. So it was a remarkable adventure, and I enjoyed both the times I was there. The first time I went, it felt really cutting edge. It really did. Just the sort of thing I like, because no one had done that for any extended period. And the second time was obviously with the Travel Channel, and we made a good film. I watched the film and I was pleased with it. You never know what it's going to be like. It's called The Hairy Man of Port Chatham. It's on Alaska's Triangle. I think it's the second episode in that series. If anyone wants to watch it, you can download the Travel app and have a look. And it was nice. From my point of view, as I said to Stephen, that had been an ambition of his for many years, and it was nice to play a part in that and help him realise that. I was glad that I'd helped him do that. So I enjoyed it. It was exactly the sort of adrenaline rush, exactly the sort of cutting edge stuff I like to do. I like to do first, or do something different, something that stretches me, or something that stimulates me intellectually. And that managed to do all three. I'm always wanting to stretch the foal, both in our understanding and experiences, but also for myself as well when I can. So, I'm not creaking yet, Mark.
Well, yeah, no, that's a compelling account for the whole town to basically, the hairy man to shut them down like that. That's the whole thing is really worth further investigation. And,
there are very few
it's
stories
always a good rule of thumb, Adam. Go ahead.
All I was going to say is there are very few stories like that left. There are very few adventures like that left, certainly in the first world, that you can actually do. Things like that really don't exist. There's a couple more that may be around, but generally speaking, they don't exist, and I thought that was fascinating.
That is quite fascinating indeed. And as I was just going to say, as a general rule of thumb, it's often said, if you can't find anyone to take you there, you're probably in for a good time.
Was that your rule when you were going out night clubbing when you were younger, Mike? That
was the rule until I got to be about 24-ish, something like that. And started getting smart. Adam, I noticed you said something earlier about researching in different areas and things like that, and you mentioned, like, for example, researching in the desert. Now, it seems almost counterintuitive. I mean, to me or a lot of folks that might not know, if you think Bigfoot or Sasquatch, you want to go to the largest forest, the nearest big forest, right? Why would you conduct research in the desert per se, and why? What would be your objective?
I think it's a good question, and I think it works out this way. When I was in Mongolia, I was struck by the fact that one of the areas where there'd been sightings of the almus, which is their equivalent of a bipedal primate, I was in very remote areas, on the edge of the Gobi Desert. I mean, I think I've mentioned to you in conversation before, there was one time when, there wasn't another person for 50 miles around, I'd calculated. There was just three of us, and then nobody else. So for many miles, when I was, one of the places I went to, I was with a hunter called Ulzi, and he showed me the point where he had seen a creature. It was bipedal. It was on two legs. And it was walking about, and he disturbed it. He come round a bend. He was out hunting marmots, and he come round a bend, and it had freaked out and run away on four legs. And I was very interested in exploring, because when I went out the first time to the desert, just from where I live in San Diego, the desert itself, some very remote places, because I was out running there only a couple of weeks ago, and, some very remote places are only a couple of hours drive away from where I live. So I was very interested in seeing those places and seeing what they might be like. And they seemed, from their geography, to be very similar to the places in Mongolia. And there's many stories coming out of the area of Yucca and desert Bigfoots. And, what people need to remember is, first of all, Native American tribes survived out there by migrating, and they did that for many thousands of years before Western people came along. And there's also large mammals out there, like the bighorn sheep, very large things. So if people can survive there and large animals can survive there, and there's stories about Bigfoot-type creatures out there, why couldn't they survive? They'd have to be migratory. I'm not saying they're static populations. Right. And they'd have to travel long distances. They would. But they easily could, and I think they do. And so I was interested in, based on what I knew about the Gobi, I thought, well, I'm in a unique position here. There aren't many people who can do this. So I should have a look at that and, set up trail cameras, explore the areas, do some tracking, and see if I could find any evidence. And I like, my first love always will be the forests. I like to be in them. And I like the weather in San Diego, but the thing I do miss is being out in the woods. I always like to be out in nature, and I live in quite an urban environment right now. So I always like to be out. But I do like the stark beauty of the desert. I like that remoteness of it, and I like some of the flora and fauna. I'm happy being out there. It makes me happy.
In that scenario, Adam, so just so I understand you, the likelihood of there being suitable habitat is often there, but it would just include or account for a substantial range for an individual or group of individuals to travel, a migration of sorts, if you would. Would that be in conjunction with game herds and that type of thing?
Yeah, and also seasonal plants in the same way, And there are one of the things I was running along a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things, why I went past was a notice about cougars. You've got to be careful of them. They're very large animals, and they have very large ranges, and they travel, and I would imagine that these creatures would as well, and also they can adapt to their environments and become smaller or larger depending on the climate. So in somewhere like Alaska, you may see bigger creatures. In somewhere like Florida or the desert, you may see smaller creatures. Well, give me an example, Adam. Let me tell you. Like, if you look at elephants, for example, Mike, savanna elephants, plains elephants are large, whereas forest elephants in the Congo, for example, are super aggressive and very small. Short elephant syndrome, and a lot of the desert type accounts of these things are that they are quite aggressive if you come across them. So that's the general. And I've never subscribed to the notion. I think that all of these things, this notion with these creatures that they're all benign and wonderful and have all hidden knowledge. I mean, they'll be like us, I would think, in a sense that some of them will be nice, but some of them won't be. Look at your dog.
And that makes total sense, what you say about the size of the morphology adaptations. Even as the typical deer hunter in America can tell you, the further north you go in North America, the larger the deer get as a general rule, just because the weather's colder and the climate's different. It takes a bit of a hardier animal. A smaller, lighter weight animal does better typically in the deep south.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, if I had to speculate, and of course it's all conjecture because I don't know, but this is my speculation, I think the ones in the south would be smaller. I mean, when I look at people, when the people who were most effective moving through the jungle were the Pygmies. They're small, they can get around the branches and all that lot. When I was in Sumatra with the Indonesian guys who were my guides in the jungle, they were small, and it was easier for them to move around in the forest. I'm a big guy, and they were quicker than me. I mean, even though I'm reasonably fit, they weren't fitter than me, the Indonesians. They smoked like chimneys, but they were more effective at moving around the jungle. It wasn't about that they knew the jungle better. They could just get under branches quicker. That was just the reality of it. It was that basic. So, yeah, I think a creature in the swamps, for all sorts of reasons, would more likely to be smaller. And that just makes sense, yeah. And when you talk about the ones in deserts and things like that, I often talk about them being very thin. They won't have the same muscular structure, and they'll have to be very hardy and adapt. But the people have lived all over the world for many, all over the world in all sorts of climates. I don't see why these creatures.
Well, certainly, yes. Humans have certainly adapted to live in all sorts of odd places in different climates.
Yeah, they're very. Yeah, and I think that they could if they wanted to.
One interesting question about the book, if you could elaborate perhaps a little bit, I believe it's chapter 3, the Bigfoot killer. Could you elaborate? What was your assessment of that individual's credibility?
Well, there were stories about one of the people I wanted to meet when I was in California was Justin Smaher. I'm not going to give away my conclusions in the book. People have to read that. But if they want to, it's up to them. But one of the people I was interested in meeting was Justin Smaher, because at the time, Nadia Newman, and at the time, he was very, very well known for alleging that he had killed a Bigfoot. He was out with a friend of his all named Jack, and he was out shooting a bear, I think. I'd have to look back my notes, but I think it was that, and I think he said he saw one and some babies, and he ended up shooting it and doing other things for the babies we won't go into now. And I wanted to meet him and assess his credibility and spend some time with him, and I did. I spent some time with him in the Sierras. And he was an interesting individual to speak to. And of course, I did spend some time thoroughly investigating his story, and my conclusions, I think, are mentioned in the book. So, yeah, I was at the time I was very interested in that story and the psychology behind it, because of course, if he had got something tangible, and I was, then that would be a good area to investigate. I haven't been there yet. I haven't been there since then. Eh?
I see. Well, that's very interesting in itself. Adam, there's something that's really might be the most important question I ever ask you. I want you to sit back and think about this one for a minute. This is a big one. Adam, what do you think Bigfoot is?
You've never asked me that. I think it's intelligent. It's certainly more intelligent than a gorilla. It may have capabilities which are different to ours. That doesn't mean that it's all pure of heart. I believe that they would have different personalities. One of the, and maybe closer to a Homo erectus. I certainly think that they have a lot of sentience. They're masters of disguise. They're very resourceful. They're probably very rare. And this notion of this idea that they are all able to have magical powers, I don't subscribe to, but I do think that they could have qualities and abilities we don't yet know about. And I'm cool with that. I don't think they're magic. And one of the, and I talk about this at length in the conclusion section of the book, but one of the parallels I like to draw is, we don't know everything about science yet. We're learning as we go along. And if I had been in the Battle of Hastings 1,000 years ago and brought a cigarette lighter out, and lit a cigarette with it, you would have called me magic and burnt me at the stake for a witch. Really, it's not that remarkable.
True.
It's not that remarkable
Very
piece of technology, but, you know, and that person at the Battle of Hastings will be no more or less intelligent than us. So there are things that we are learning. We're learning all the time. And I think that's a good thing. And, I think that our understanding of the universe has moved on a lot. I mean, let me draw a parallel that's remarkable when we talk about... So, you know, when I was a child, there was only ever really talked about, apart from ourselves, there was us and Neanderthals, and that was it, really, and we were seen as the epitome of evolution. Now, of course, we know that there were many very different types of even of human. You know, I'm not going to list them all, but you know yourself, dear people, Denisovans, whatever. So our understanding of our own knowledge and our understanding in genetics has really expanded a lot. We know that there are races which are undiscovered, which are within our DNA, which we haven't yet identified, different types of human, and we are extraordinarily complex, and these could simply be a subvariant of those with capabilities. What do I mean by capabilities? Because I think, you know, people say, well, what's he trying to say? Well, let's have a look at Denisovans, for example. And one of the things that we've speculated is that Nepali people, because part of the book deals with Nepal and Tibet, and not Tibet, Nepal, really, and my adventures in Nepal looking for the Yeti. And one of the things that, you know, we have speculated about is that Denisovan people and Nepali people, they had a high tolerance for altitude, and some of the DNA there has given the people in Nepal a ability to have extraordinary high tolerance for altitude. You know, that's quite scientifically, that's a scientific hypothesis. So it doesn't mean they're magic. It means that they've got a physical capability which we've only recently speculated about and identified. And that could very well be the case with Bigfoots. Do you see what I mean? There's a difference. And what I'm trying to say, you can't be good. There's different physiological properties that they may possess.
There's a distinction to be made there. Yes, I follow.
Yeah, based on relic DNA that they may have. And I think all of that's inherently scientifically plausible. There's nothing dramatic about that. It's just the mystery. The reason I'm interested in these things is very simply, I mean, I love adventure, and I've done adventure and exploration all my life. I love it. But there's a fundamental part of me that is interested in the level of sentience of these creatures and what they might do and possess. Because I think that we'll learn a lot about ourselves, and I think that that's quite good for the arrogance of humanity. A bit of humility is good for the soul, and I think that would be very good for people, really, to understand. And it doesn't take anything away from religion in any way. You can be as religious as you want. You're just a different type of person or creature or whatever you want to call it. But I think that the intellectual point is for me, the most interesting. So that's the long answer. The short answer is I don't know yet, Mike. I hope to find out.
Well, that's very fascinating and insightful perspective. And it's great to hear such a thoughtful answer as that. That was heavy, man.
No, it's all right. My pleasure, man. You know, you've never asked that. We've never actually discussed that, I don't think. So it's always worth...
No, we never have taken the time to really just say it like that. Hey, man, you know, what do you think it really is? But that was a fascinating response.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you that question one day, but I'm conscious you're interviewing me, so I can't ask you questions.
Yes, bring it on me one day, man. Surprise me.
Well,
Adam,
I'm restricted myself.
If it wouldn't tip your hand too much, and I know you don't want to say too much about what might be in the book. You know, if you sit here and give me everything, I might not want to buy my third copy or something like that. But let me ask you this. You know, species, they come and go, and our time here as a species is certainly limited, as all are. Many people feel that some unproven animals, or cryptids, if you will, may no longer be with us. Perhaps in the case of, like, for example, the Loch Ness Monster may have been around at one time, not, you know, quite recently, but might not be with us at this point, you know, just because species just don't last forever. If there was ever a situation that was encroaching in either the case of the Bigfoot or the Yeti, do you see a situation where in either one of these cases, will we be sitting here in 200 or 300 years going, gee, I wish, we had really got on that Yeti thing while there were still some Yetis around or whatever? You feel me on that?
Yeah, I do. I certainly felt with the orang pendek when I researched that, like the bipedal primate in Sumatra, what I was very concerned about, there's a lot of evidence of the existence of the orang pendek, and I don't have time. We've only got a few minutes, so I don't have time to go into it now. But even people who are extremely skeptical about other creatures would say, well, there's at least a possibility that could exist. But what I worry deeply about with that is that its environment is being so badly eroded, both by logging, illegal logging, and also by basically people breeding, more and more people cutting more and more jungle down, If I get married and I marry her and I have a wife and we have children, my children need more forest, there's that progression. And I worry very much about the environment there. And, the thing about virgin rainforest is once it's gone forever. Rainforest can go back, but it's not virgin rainforest. So I think that there's a possibility with that. Funny enough, with the Yeti, in contrast, I was slightly encouraged. The first time I went, I've been to both the west of Nepal and the east of Nepal. And in the show I did with Josh, I was in the east of Nepal. It was a place I asked to go to do the show. The first show I did with Monster Quest was in the west of Nepal. I didn't find a lot of evidence of it there, and I was a bit discouraged, really. I thought, it might be dying out. But when I went to the east, I did find some evidence, including some very credible recent sightings. So I was kind of encouraged by that, I thought, well, that's actually pretty good. I mean, you've got an area with Nepal, it's very remote. 70% of it people don't go to. People need to understand that there's not like shopping malls in every bit of the jungle. I mean, when I was in India, I was looking for the Mandi Barung, and I spoke to a government official there, and the forest is vast, hundreds of miles. And he said, well, we don't know what's in about 80% of this. We don't really have a clue. There are these places still where these things could exist. But the thing is, what I'm consistent about is that they would need a decent amount of habitat. They need wide ranges, and like orangs do, because I think a lot of them are quite solitary and they wander around. And needing that environment and space is important. And your ecology is your heritage. Those woods that you so love in the Congaree, they're your heritage, and they're also part of you. And I don't want another housing estate to be built on them. I mean, some people might say that's selfish, but I think it's only selfish in a transitory way, because my generation, there'll be another generation after that. So I'm very keen on conservation. I really am.
Well, that makes two of us, and that was also another great response, another brilliant response by you. Unfortunately, Adam, we're going to be running a little short on time. I wish I could sit here for the rest of the evening and chat away, but I'm afraid that we're about out of time for this week.
No, that was good. It was very different to be on the other side. I liked it for a change. But next week, who have we got coming up next week, Mike?
Well, next week we'll be talking to Vanessa Hogel about remote viewing, and that'll be at a special broadcast time of 11 p.m. Eastern and 8 p.m. Pacific.
Awesome. Brilliant. Well, thanks ever so much for asking me the questions, Mike. I'm sure our listeners will have enjoyed it. And Mike and I, ladies and gentlemen, will be back next week to talk to Vanessa about remote viewing. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.